a company called Stats Inc. Developed a system to use cameras in an NBA arena to capture the XY position of everything that moved on the court 150 times a second. And that was called Sport View. And they started with a couple of teams. Now that's evolved even further to a company called Hawkeye, which does this for a variety of sports. Actually tracks, I think it's 18 different points on a body, 100 plus times a second. That every time we have that kind of evolution in the data set, it spurs greater investment into the data science around that data.
So, like, how do you kinda think about translating sports analytics into, a business setting?
The To understand that you're making the right decisions and have the confidence you're making the right decisions, even though it's 60% chance that those decisions are going to turn out well.
Yeah, right.
Given the options in front of you, that might be the best odds you have to succeed. And so that's an important scope to context to put around these decisions. And one of the things that analytics can do, I think, is really help decision makers understand that.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Decision Intelligence Laboratory podcast. I'm Vijay Mehrotra, and I'm here with my co host, Michael Watson. And today, our guest is Ben Alamar, who's a PhD economist by academic training, but he spent his career working at the intersection of data, modeling, and sports. He's had time in consulting, he's done behavioral research, he's worked for ESPN and StubHub, and in different roles for the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Oklahoma City Thunder. He's the founding editor of a really interesting journal called Quantitative Analysis in Sports and the author of a book called Sports Analytics, a guide for coaches, managers, and other decision makers. Welcome, Ben. And Mike, I'll throw it over to you to get us started.
Yeah, welcome, Ben, and, just to kick us off, like, can you just tell us how you got involved in analytics and how you've seen a change over the years? Or
Yeah,
sports analytics, I should say?
yeah, absolutely. So my sports analyst career is a total accident. I was a postdoc at University of California, San Francisco, doing research on tobacco control legislation, and I happened to see an ad on Craigslist for a fantasy sports startup company that was trying to use some of the advanced metrics that were coming out of baseball at the time, inspired by the book Moneyball, to create a new kind of game. And I jumped in, I got this an opportunity to consult with them for a little bit of time, learned sort of what was at the time just really getting started in sports that I really cared about, like football and basketball, in terms of doing quantitative analysis. And so once I saw that was a possibility, I decided that's really where I wanted to spend my time. I jumped in as best in a variety of ways, doing research as an academic and consulting, and then working finally with teams from a long term perspective. Um, when we got started, as I say, it was really the very beginning of basketball analytics and football analytics. Baseball had been around to some extent for a while, but um, really, their basketball on paper, which by Dean Oliver, which is sort of the birth of modern basketball analytics, had been published about, I think, 18 months before this. I got started in the field, and by the time I started working for a team, I think there were maybe four other people doing significant analytics work for NBA teams. So it was
And
really the
Ben, this is 2005, 2008, somewhere in that time frame?
Yeah, so I started with the Thunder in 2007, and so I started with, probably about 2005, with doing sports analytics of any sort.
Was basketball and football, like, slow to take up because it was the games were too fluid, it was just harder to you had a couple stats in basketball, like free throw percentage, but other than that, it was just too fluid to measure? Is that why it was slower?
Yeah, I mean, the advances in all this in every sport is always driven by better data. So anytime you get when I started, like, you get box score data, and if you really tried hard, you could probably get some basic play-by-play data for basketball. You could get a little bit of football data. It was really hard to come by football data without, going through and creating it yourself. So that's just the lack of data created just lack of ability to do a whole lot. Once we got started and we got running, there was things we could do. We could advance with box score and then certainly play by play data. And then, there's sort of an explosion in data, that drove a massive growth when we came into, real motion tracking
I
data.
kinda wanna jump on that, Ben, but I wanna go back once. Is there a time, even when the data was a little more primitive, when you sort of, had an executive in a basketball setting have an aha and say, "Ah, I hear what you're saying, and my thinking is changing. I'm changing a decision based on what you've told me analytically."
Yeah, certainly. That one of the sort of the most fun moments for me in that vein was when I was with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I'd been with them for a little over a year, and there was this old time scout that when I first started, he had no interest in analytics or data. He knew the game. Like, yeah, he'd forgotten more basketball than I'll ever know,
Right.
but he really just wasn't trying to engage. Wasn't the classic Moneyball confrontation kind of thing, but he just wasn't that interested. Um, Over the course of a year or so, we got to know each other. We chatted a bit and got to know me better, and then we were in the draft room, uh, ranking power forwards, and he goes first. He ranks his power forwards for the upcoming draft, and it's my turn. I rank rank them, and it's the different set of rankings, and like sort of walk through why I think this is and what the data is, the argument. And he goes, "Hey, wait! I got to change my vote because what Ben said makes sense. This is different." And so it really was a great moment for me to made an impact and was able to get to a point where he could hear and listen to a different perspective that he wasn't used to.
That's cool. That reminds me of the scene from, the Nike movie with, Michael Jordan, right? When they're ranking the power forward the forwards and, Melvin
Yep.
Turpin, that famous scene. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Well, so Ben, you mentioned the kind of the motion film and the data that's coming out of that. Can you kinda give us a background on that? I know about it because I've talked to you about it in the past, but I don't think our audience has any idea just how much data is being captured every instant in an NBA game.
Yeah, so in 2000 around 2010, a company called Stats Inc. Developed a system to use cameras in an NBA arena to capture the XY position of everything that moved on the court 150 times a second. And that was called Sport View. And they started with a couple of teams. One of those teams was the Oklahoma City Thunder, who I was working for at the time, as well as I think the Boston Celtics, the Dallas Mavericks, maybe the San Antonio Spurs. Anyway, a couple of teams, and slowly, like as the teams start to get into this data and start to figure out, that it's really a different level of a kind of analysis you can do with this that you couldn't do with play-by-play data. You have just so much more context of what's happening. And so eventually the NBA said, "All right, we're going to just do this for in every arena for every team." And they rolled that out. And at the same time, a company called Second Spectrum developed a machine learning algorithms to turn that massive data set into basketball terminology. So they identified pick and rolls, identified types of defense, and used it in pick and rolls, and then you could then see how effective different kinds of tactics were in different against different kinds of players, and then to make decisions about which players fit your system best, how to attack opponents. And then it was all tied to video, which made it really easy for coaches to engage and see that, oh yeah, they are accurately identifying these really finite things in basketball that coaches understand that really make a difference in how you attack things. And now that's evolved even further to a company called Hawkeye, which does this for a variety of sports. Actually tracks, I think it's 18 different points on a body 100 plus times a second. So now you don't just have one dot for a player, you have 18 dots for every player, and you can see things like, shooting motions and how far they're reaching out when they're contesting shots and all that kind of stuff that you maybe couldn't, you had to, even with the previous set kind of data, you had to sort of guess at a little bit. Now, with this kind of data, you can get even much more granular than you could even before. So it's that every time we have that kind of evolution in the data set, it spurs greater investment into the data science around that data.
I've got a kind of question, like how you translate some of this. I know, doing some research on some of your work, Ben, like you're very good at talking about like, the performance analytics, which you've talked about now, but also just the business of sports. But, one of the things I've always thought is kind of strange about sports analogies is that, someone always has to win. And so sometimes feels like, some of these are a little forced, like, well, someone had to win the Super Bowl. It wasn't like, but like no one had to invent LLM. So like, how do you kind of think about translating sports analytics into, business setting?
Yeah, I think that there's across all industries, anytime you're dealing with analytics, a lot of the problems are the same conceptually, like it's just in a different context. And
Yeah.
so, you have to really understand the context that you're in to get the analysis and right and do all that. But you have the same kind of problem, engaging with stakeholders, making sure you understand what they're interested in and how you can help them make better decisions. Data's a mess, like everywhere you go, it's
Yeah.
gonna be a mess. Um, and you have ideas about how things are going to work and things that are going to be valuable, and then you have to balance that with what is actually practical and will advance the business's needs. It's all very similar. It's just a question of really understanding the context and appreciating the context, not only of the business situation but also the level of the data that you have to speak from. I think this is a key lesson that I learned the hard way sometimes. But in sports, particularly the early days, we had a lot of uncertainty in the data. It was really added a lot of value, but it was not like It was not like an A/B test where you have millions and millions of data points and you could say, "Oh, for sure that button should be green."
Right.
It was like reducing risk around really risky decisions.
Well, so let's that Ben, you couldn't have teed me up any better with your close there. I'd love to. I mean, if I think about the people in the game, basketball that are under duress, the players, the coaches, the executives, the GMs are all operating under a great deal of stress. They've all been successful to get to this level, and now you're challenged with getting, talk about behavior change, but I think often it's a belief change as well, right? So, um, in different cultural environments, I imagine it's a very different approach, but I'd love to get a sense from you of kind of uh, what are the challenges and what kind of experiences have you had where you've overcome somebody's resistance to thinking differently?
Yeah, and it does. It is a mindset change, but I think one of the important things in bringing that kind of mindset change into it is not you're minimizing the amount of in everybody's mind as you're presenting it about how much of a mindset change it really is. Um, because if I come and bring into a meeting a whole bunch of diagnostics of my models and explain these different variables and how the model works and everything, people are going to glaze over. They can't are not going to be able to make that bridge no matter how much they want to, because it's just too different from what they're thinking. But if I bring all of this data and I talk about it in the context that they're used to. So one of the easy tricks that we used is to talk about comparable players. Everybody loves to talk about comparable players. Scouts do this all the time. Who's this guy like? Who's he going to be?
Yeah.
And that's what we did. It's like, we think this guy is going to play like these three guys. Like he's there. They when they in college, they were most likely, these are the most likely college players that he played like, and boom, there you go. And so it allows them much easier access into the set of information. And as you're presenting it as a set of information in the same language they're used to, it's not simple, it's not obvious, because at the end of the day, you like some of the comparisons, they're gonna say, like, "That doesn't make sense to intuitively, it doesn't make sense to them at all." And so you
Yeah.
have to get into some of the details as to why this player is comparable, and that's those are the teaching moments there to help you really bridge the gap. But at that point, they're asking the questions, and you've got that entry point.
Well, speaking of risk, like in behavior change, the one that popped in my mind, I thought it was a great scene. It must have been in the book Moneyball, where the manager was just basically like, "I've already done all I can do. If I win or lose, like I can't have, I don't have any control anymore. I just have to let it play out."
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the same thing with you do. I see it on the NFL games. It's like, oh, the analytics says go for it on 4th down, but you know that if you go for it and fail, and you maybe it's like the analytics say 75% chance, but it's 25% chance. Like you know, you're in just big trouble if you fail to get that conversion.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? The risk perception that analytics is not the truth. It's just
Yeah,
probably
I mean, to me, this is one of the really interesting parts of it. I mean, you think just last night with, about 5 minutes left, the Knicks were up by 15 points. Apparently, and I just heard this on the way in the last 11 years, teams that have been up by that much in the playoffs with that much time left have a perfect record, and it's several hundred games.
okay.
So, you know, there's no chance at that point. There's 99.9% chance the Knicks are going to win this game.
Yeah.
Indiana just goes crazy. Like, and so the analysis, well, what should the Knicks do to change their like nothing. Like they
Nothing.
played
Right.
great and
Yeah.
they got really, 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 really unlucky. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I mean, should there be adjustments? Of course, you always have to anticipate and make changes, but the to understand that you're making the right decisions and have the confidence that you're making the right decisions, even though it's 60% chance that those decisions are going to turn out well.
Yeah. Right.
Given the options in front of you, that might be the best odds you have to succeed. And so that's an important scope to context to put around these decisions. And one of the things that analytics can do, I think, is really help decision makers understand that. Like they all know that they've been in this business forever. They know the risks. They know it's but to actually quantify and say, yeah, there's like a 50% chance that this is going to happen. Of going for it on 4th down, sometimes it's like, it's a toss up. And sometimes it's like 65% better, to if you go for it. And knowing that range and knowing the variables that actually affect that range and that difference in probabilities and how much risk you're taking, it's a really big deal because it helps decision makers know when to balance because they will have gut feelings and I 4th down decision making, like they have a flow of the game that
Yeah.
they understand that they will argue about. It's like, sure, okay, if it's 55% chance, if you feel strongly, go do it the
Right.
other way. If it's 75% chance, maybe you should be really, really strong to go against it. Like,
Okay. If it's
but
95% chance, it's like, yeah, you're
it helps everybody balance things when you can put a little bit more uh, quant quantitative analysis into what the risk actually is.
Yeah, and it exposes your strategic thinking in a way because it sort of forces you to think not just about the probabilities, but also the outcomes and how you value those outcomes. Whether it's being second guessed in the press or situationally not going up 10 here
Yeah,
for a chance to go up 14, what's the long-term strategic view of that? And that I think is somehow harder
yeah,
than just your gut, is to
yeah,
thinking about, okay, what's, what upside downside essentially.
yeah, yeah, and as the, as a data person in these discussions, like one of the things to really um, be cognizant of is like they have to make these decisions. Like you can have your feelings, but they're actually in the hot seat. They're the ones who
yes.
the press is going to kill. They're the
Right.
ones who could lose their very high paying job that they've dreamed their whole lives for. So just because the data is really clear or strongly pointing one direction doesn't mean that like they have to do it. Like it's not like that at all. And there's a lot more involved and you need to have that understanding of what you're asking somebody to do before to understand what it takes for them to actually get over the hump and the kinds of risks and things that they're actually taking.
So Ben, like along those lines, um, I would guess that, all this sports analytics kind of started with like, what's the probability of winning by doing a certain decision?
Yeah.
Has the objective function changed to say both the probability of winning and what the fans may think? Because the fans are a huge stakeholder in this, right? This is like how they generate the money, making the fans happy. And is the fans pop up in the objective function at all or not
I
yet?
mean, not really. Like, I think that there are certainly teams that from on the business side care deeply
Yes.
about those things
Yeah.
and want to understand the fan reaction to different kinds of things. And we're always, on the business side, you need to be able to measure and understand, how much is winning adding to your revenue, like versus how much you're actually doing right as an organization, because those winning always, covers all sins, like in
Yeah.
sports. And you want to make sure that you're not, covering up some sins that you can reverse, and you do even better just because you happen to be winning at the time. But yeah, in terms of actually making personnel decisions, strategic decisions, I've never been in an organization that said, "Well, how is this going to play with the fans if we
Interesting.
do
Okay.
this?" Because it's just, they that's not to say they've made decisions that how is this going to play with, how if we add this player, we draft this player, how's that going to play with other guys on the team, and how are they going to react? That's the thing that matters a lot, but
Okay.
not from a fan perspective.
Oh, cool. Okay. Thanks.
So, Ben, I'd love to have you kinda share sort of story where you couldn't get a decision maker over the hump, and maybe one where it was challenging and you did kinda shift their thinking. And this is
Yeah,
pre-camera data, post-camera data, you pick your point in time, no constraints this.
yeah. My biggest regret in this is the Cleveland Cavaliers. We had the first pick in the draft, and it was a weird draft. It was the 2013 draft, I think. Is that right? Yeah, the 2013 draft, and we had the number 1 pick in the draft, and there weren't a lot of great players. There was no obvious number 1 pick. There wasn't like there was a Wembanyama there to just you don't have to think about.
Yeah.
Um, there were a lot of sort of mediocre players in the draft, and you can gauge this because they're like we got, I think, 0 calls to trade for the number 1 pick.
Ah,
And in the week leading up to the draft, we're in the draft room and everybody has a different number 1 pick, which again, like never happens in a draft. It's you know just the way it is. And we end up taking Anthony Bennett in this draft. And to me, the data was just so clear that he was not only not good enough to be the number 1 pick, but not going to be successful in the NBA. That the fact that I couldn't get our GM to get off of Anthony as a number 1 pick is something that's really stuck with me. Like, what could I have done? What could we have done? Because he turns out to be, to my mind, probably the worst first pick in a draft ever. It's hard to think of a worse number 1 pick in the NBA draft. Um, and so, like, it was just a massive mistake. We it's not like that we could have we Giannis was in that draft, but nobody was thinking about Giannis at the number 1 pick.
Right.
So,
Right.
we can be forgiven for that, but we should have been able to get a functional player, and we didn't. Uh, and and it was clearly knowable. And so I would have, reflecting on it, I think our process was a little bit flawed, and a more rigorous, decision making process probably would have gotten us into a better place than where we ended up. So that's the worst time where I couldn't make it work.
Ben, I'm gonna let you sit with your pain for just a minute to just mention that Ben talked about decision-making process, and, we have a guest coming on in a few episodes who's gonna talk exactly about designing decision-making processes because I think it's a really important thing, and we don't talk about it enough within the decision intelligence space, so thanks for calling that out. Now to the good news. Have you got a counterbalancing story where you did get a GM or a player or a coach over the hump on something tricky?
Yeah, I think so. We had the 2008 draft, and we it was our last draft in Seattle. We was before we moved to Oklahoma, um, and we had the 4th pick in the draft. And there were 2 significant camps within our draft room there, debating between Russell Westbrook and Brook Lopez. And the thing that was really interesting, our GM at Sam Presti, who's still the president of basketball operations over in OKC. Um, he really liked Russell, really connected with how he played, and how athletic and competitive, incredibly competitive. These are, Sam and Russ are probably the 2 most competitive people I've ever met in my life. Um, and but he didn't Russ played off guard in college. Uh,
Who was their
Sam,
point guard again? I'm trying to
uh,
remember.
shoot, I I can't pull it out of my old brain right now, but
Not
he
Earl Watson,
played in the NBA.
yeah.
But yeah, guy who had a reasonable NBA career played point. Russ played the off guard. Sam wanted Russ to play point guard in the NBA, and like, and so he asked me like, well, how does he do as a point guard? I'm like, I don't know. How am I supposed to know that? There aren't a ton of players in history that have gone from playing off guard to playing point guard in the NBA that we can look at and say, like, here's how it works. Does we just don't have the data to do this. But that wasn't a good enough answer. We had to create some kind of evidence to help make this decision. Like, what can we do to help inform this decision some way? And so my intern at the time was this kid from Stanford, and we watched a whole bunch of film. We tracked our own data set to measure how effective Russ was as a passer, and does basically when he passes the ball to a shooter, are they more likely to make it than if somebody else passes them the ball? And so we created this data set, and we watched a ton of UCLA basketball and a bunch of other. We did it for a bunch of other players in that draft to make sure that we had some context. We did it for some NBA point guards, so we could make sure we again had context for these estimates. And in doing that, like, yeah, Russ came out pretty well. Like, he didn't come out. Derrick Rose was in that draft, and he was the best in that draft, and he was at the level of Chris Paul, from those measurements that we were trying to estimate. But Russ wasn't that far behind, and he was certainly ahead of a lot of NBA level point guards and other college point guards who were going to be drafted and played in the NBA. So this was not definitive in any way. Like, this was, when going back to what I'm talking about, sort of, we didn't have the data to say, yes, we have a high confidence that Russ can play point guard. What I could say though is, yeah, Russ has this skill that seems to be valuable in the NBA. So we're taking a decision that was pretty risky and shrinking that risk a little bit. Like, yeah, we have a little bit better information to understand that he can do the things that Sam already thought he could do. He was just looking for more support, more evidence of whether what he saw was actually true. And so our analysis sort of confirmed what his hypothesis about Russ. And so that, eventually he ends up taking Russ, and the rest is history. But, you know, uh, that was a felt like it was a really strong win and a strong process in that we went back and forth. We talked about, what we were going to define, what we are going to try and measure, what, the clear hypothesis was here, came back, did the work, came back, could validate this hypothesis to some extent. And so we moved on from there. So.
And I love that story because it translates into, like, what I see every data scientist whose tendency to be like, "Well, we just don't have that data," and they just stop. And I think your story, like, tells you, like, be creative. Like, can you tease out pieces of that story that you need to make this a decision has to be made? Can you tease out and find the data in some other way? I love that story.
Yeah, and I should say I learned that lesson from a friend of mine, Roland Beach, who is ran a site called 82games.com, and I worked with him and at this fancy startup company, and he was always about creating more data. Like, he's a nothing trumps better data.
Yeah.
And he just launched, like, in the NBA playoffs this year, physicality has been sort of the buzzword. And he is actually tracking, he has a very rigorous definition of physicality and how in different dimensions. And he is tracking every playoff game right now on physicality, and really, and it's like a totally new kind of data set, totally different view of the game. And he's learning and sharing with a whole bunch of things that are really different. And it's exactly that, because he's creating a data set that didn't exist
Right.
before. And so you don't have to you don't need a whole lot of fancy modeling if we got information nobody else has.
Yeah, right.
Well, so let's kind of pursue that path a little bit more, Ben. It sounds like there was a really kind of, as you said, a process around that Sam Presti decision. What do you see leaders doing to kind of foster a culture that supports kind of evidence-based discussion versus kind of gut feel and loudest voice in the room type of stuff? And that's within sports or outside of sports, as you see fit.
Yeah, yeah. I think that when leaders make space for it, and they demand that people understand it. They don't demand anybody agrees. They don't demand that anybody thinks a particular way. But they say that if you don't understand what our analyst is talking about, if these metrics are totally foreign to you, then you're not prepared to have this conversation. Because you can there are always holes in the information, and any good analyst will help explain where the holes are for sure. But if leadership is demanding that at least you are engaged with this information that you are not previously used to, and is always part of the conversation, is part of the language, is part of how we're doing things. Um, and then when there is conflict between intuition and data, how do we resolve this? How like and can we have a reasonable discussion to make sure we understand where the conflicts are and why we are seeing these things? And now in basketball, it's very often that you know um, these experts again they know the game really well, and so they will see things that the data can't so far, like that we don't capture certain nuances yet. And so they will they can share and talk through things, and but it's got to be logical. It can't be gut feel stuff. It's got to be like, here's the argument as to why I think this is different from what the data is saying, and that puts the right frame around it to have a discussion. And like as an analyst in those discussions, I will always be make efforts to make sure I understand. And one thing, like, to understand their argument. Two, can I actually quantify what they're talking about in some way and bring that into my analysis to improve it? And three, like, you know if I don't have the ability to refute what they're saying, I'm not I want to make sure I'm being honest and speaking about what the data can say, and not overstate it just so I can win an argument. And creating that environment around the whole table that's what leaders really need to do to make sure that we get to a good place.
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
was just struck because we talk all the time about how we need to earn the trust as analysts and data scientists and AI people. We need to earn the trust of the users, but the way you talked about it there is that trust is a two-way street in a way. How you engage with those folks who are seeing things that your data isn't, a lot depends on your trust of their judgment.
Yeah, I mean, and you have to, like, there's you know I think that for me, the first time I sat in a room watching film with scouts, I it was I was awed, quite honestly. Like the things they could see very quickly, just whether they mattered or not, like that was a different question.
yeah.
Like, but they could stay the detail they could understand and see within the game. It was amazing, and so it gave me this context. Like, I got a lot to learn, so I need to learn as much as I can to be good at this. And so I spend time listening to them. How do they talk? What are they interested in? What kinds of questions are they asking? How are they talking about these players in a way that you know and how can I bend the analysis and frame the analysis in a way that fits within their thinking. Um, and yeah, if you don't again, if you don't trust, if you don't have any kind of regard for those people, then you're going to come across as very arrogant and say, like, yeah, well, you're ignoring this and you're doing it wrong. Like, and to me, that's never an approach that's going to long term win the day.
So Ben, I have a different question for you. So I teach a bunch of analytics students, and I'll get people who ask me about, should I get into sports analytics?
Yeah.
And I have two pieces of advice I give, and I want to see if they're wrong or they're outdated. But the first piece is like, hey, it's super competitive. There's tons of people who would work for free in this, and so just be ready. The salaries might be lower. It might be hard to get, the job that you want. And the second piece of advice comes from our friend. He said, like, if you just love sports, like if you go into sports analytics, that's a job, and so you don't be careful that you don't ruin the thing that you love by taking a job in this space. So what do you think of that advice? Am I wrong? Should I
Yeah.
update my advice?
So yeah, I think you're on the right track in a variety of ways. I think that absolutely is very competitive. Well, and I should say the competitive though, in a sense that there are a lot of people, as you say, there are a lot of people that want to do this and say they want to do this. There aren't a ton of people that are incredibly qualified to do it,
Okay.
because the technical skills are one thing, but the number of students I've talked about that want to get into basketball analytics that haven't read Basketball on Paper, which I mentioned, like that, which is the foundational text of basketball analytics. Like, I don't know how you go through and say like you just haven't done any prep work. You haven't done
Yeah.
any real research. And so like finding the folks that are not only um, technically qualified, but have the have thought through and understand the what's happened before in the field. The field is pretty well developed at this point. There's a lot that's happened, and if you don't have a connection to that, like it's going to be hard for you to distinguish yourself. Now that said, I also think the field is growing
Okay.
tremendously. As the data gets more and more complex, and there are more and more companies. It's not just teams. There are lots of supporting companies around this that are growing as well. So there's a lot of opportunity. Salaries are better than they were when I started,
Okay.
um, but they are not competitive with the high tech industry. They are significantly below that for sure. So you have to trade off like, do I care enough about this? And it means gonna mean as much to me as to give up the money that I'm gonna have to give up to do this.
Yeah.
And, that's you realistically wanna make that choice. In terms of knowing how it's gonna impact whether you love sports or not,
Yeah.
it's gonna be hard to know that until you're actually in it. Like, it's funny, it's messed with my own fandom in a lot of ways. Working for teams, obviously, you root for the teams. When I worked at ESPN, like, I started rooting for ratings. Like, that's like, what you root for, that stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, but, but at the end of the day, it's still like, no matter how much time, I've spent just focused on the data and the nitty-gritty of it, it's at the end of the day, it's still sports and it's still a lot of fun.
Okay. You still love to watch the game? Yeah.
Absolutely,
Oh, perfect. That's good
absolutely.
to hear. All right. Good.
Excellent. Well, last question, Ben. We ask all of our guests, is there a great book you've read recently that you'd recommend, a TV series, a podcast? What's on your radar?
Yeah, so and Dean's got his second book, Basketball Beyond Paper, also a great read. The book that I just recently finished with, which I think is fantastic and, is very much along the vein of Moneyball, is a book called Ballistic by, Henry Abbott, who is a longtime, basketball, writer and editor at True Hoop. He was at ESPN for a long time, and, Ballistic is the story of a man named Marcus Elliott who devoted his life to helping athletes not get hurt and understand what we can do to prevent injuries. And what that has led to is some incredible work in biomechanics, incredible work in data collection, where he uses combinations of force plates and motion capture data to analyze high level athletes in a variety of really really unique ways, and measure things that nobody else has really measured before, to understand how they are moving and what are ways that in which they're moving that are going to lead to injuries later on. And so you know if you see the Jason Tatum injury this year was is devastating for the Celtics. And is there something in how he was moving? Would every player, given exactly the same moment, have suffered the same injury? Probably not. There's probably something in Jason's biomechanics that made it more likely for him than some other players. And understanding those differences and helping athletes correct those differences is what Marcus does at P3, and it's truly revolutionary, truly innovative work, that is, again, much like Moneyball, having at some points, hard time gaining the right footholds because some folks don't wanna do things that are radically different than what they've been doing in the past.
No, it kind of, I mean, we spend a lot of time estimating probabilities, and the underlying assumptions underneath those probabilities are rarely verified, right? Not everything is independent and identically distributed, or very few things are identically distributed to one another, particularly when it comes to people. So that's one of the themes of this episode is you want better data, go out and get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Better data wins every time.
Yeah, and that's a great line to close on. Thanks everybody for riding along on the Decision Intelligence
Yep. Thanks,
podcast with
Ben.
us. Uh, if you like what you heard, like it online, share it with your friends, send us an email at decisionintelligencepodcast@gmail.com saying subscribe. And if you've got an idea that you'd like to share on the podcast, send an email there too. Thanks very much.